Good morning, everyone. My name is Jasper, and I am the Communications and Engagement Manager here at UKRIO. I want to give everybody a very warm welcome to the first event in our in this year's expert webinar series, dedicated to the launch of our new Authorship Integrity Toolkit. As many of you will know, our expert webinar series runs throughout the year, and it's a collection of publicly accessible webinars where different speakers from the research community share insights on key issues in research integrity. These events give attendees the opportunity to learn about the latest developments and examples of best practice to support their work. Across the upcoming year, we'll host additional guests speaking about topics such as non-genuine participants in online research, fostering positive research culture, and whistleblowing in research settings. For today's event, we have a particularly special installments in the series, as we'll be focusing on our brand new Authorship Integrity Toolkit released just last week. As many of you are likely familiar, this toolkit is the product of a larger project that has been going on behind the scenes for many months now, which has been a really wide and thorough effort from a diverse group of stakeholders from across the research community, including many in attendance today. To briefly cover our schedule for today's session, the event will run for approximately 60 minutes. You're welcome to join and leave the session as you need, and registration will remain open throughout, so colleagues can join at any time. First, we'll begin with a welcome and a short introduction to UKRIO and our work from our CEO, Stephanie Neve. After that, we'll move into the project introduction, which will be led by Dr. Joe Woodhams, our Senior Programs Manager. Joe will then continue with a reflection on the project workshops. Following that, she'll be joined by our Director of Programs, Catherine Dowley, and together they'll present the Authorship Toolkit. Finally, I'll facilitate a Q&A at the end, and then we'll bring the event to a close. Afterwards, I'll come in to talk briefly about how we intend to keep the documents alive and reactive through the upcoming months. So before we get started, some brief housekeeping. Today's session will be recorded and shared via our public channels. As this is a webinar, attendee identities will not be visible or disclosed in this recording. Later in the session, we will host a Q&A. If you prefer to remain anonymous during that Q&A, you will have the option to submit questions anonymously. Just to let you know, attendee cameras and microphones will remain off for the duration of today's webinar. Additionally, there are a few functions at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen that will be useful. There's a live transcript enabled for today's webinar. If you'd like captions of the discussion, you can turn the transcript on or off using the toolbar. There's also a chat, which you can use to share any comments or to say hello to other attendees. You can also message the hosts and panelists directly to flag any technical issues, such as accessibility challenges. We will also be using the chat to provide supplementary information and links related to the presentation throughout the event. There's also a Q&A function. Please use this for any questions you may have about the content discussed during the webinar. These questions can be submitted at any time during the session, as well as during the dedicated Q&A segment at the end. During that dedicated section, we will select questions for UKRIO staff to answer live. Please note that for our Q&A section, we ask that you only submit questions that relate to the authorship toolkits, the authorship tools themselves, or to the wider authorship project. Please refrain from using it as an opportunity to ask any questions about specific cases of authorship practice you've encountered in your work. Matters like this should instead be directed to our advisory service, where we'll be able to give them the right level of support. We'll drop details for using this service in the chat. More broadly, we ask that all contributions in both the chat and Q&A remain professional and respectful. Okay, with all that being said, I am pleased to now welcome Stephanie Neve, Chief Executive Officer at UKRIO, who will start us off by giving a little background on our charity and our work. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasper, and good morning, everyone. I am delighted you've joined us today and equally pleased to be sharing our newly published Authorship Toolkit. The outputs today are the fruit of a project commissioned by UKRI to support collaborative thinking and progress in discussing authorship disputes. And so first and foremost, I want to, first of all, thank UKRI for their generous funding and to everyone who has contributed to the project, whether you were an early reviewer, a workshop attendee, or an expert advisory group member. Your contributions have been invaluable to the development of this toolkit, and we really do thank you for your time. Before Joe and Catherine dive in and tell you more about the toolkit, though, I thought I would take a moment to just briefly introduce who we are and what we do for those of you who are new to UKRIO or could use a quick refresher. The UK Research Integrity Office, or UKRIO for short, is an independent charity with a mission to support the research community produce work of the highest integrity, quality, and efficacy. And we do that by operating across a multitude of levels. So at the individual level, we provide researchers and practitioners with accessible practical advice and guidance. At the organizational level, we help foster collaboration and the sharing of good practice across institutions and sectors. And at the systems level, we act as a thought leader, helping to shape national and international conversations around research integrity. Indeed, I am in fact speaking to you today from Ljubljana, where the annual Congress for the European Network of Research Integrity Offices is currently taking place and representing the UK perspective. In terms of what we do, one of our core services is our confidential advisory service. So every year we respond to hundreds of inquiries ranging from data fabrication to governance issues, and we know from feedback that that service is a lifeline both for individuals facing difficult situations and for organizations seeking expert independent guidance. But the value of that service goes beyond individual cases. So, because of the nature and volume of the inquiries we receive, it gives us this really unique intelligence into both emerging trends and also reoccurring challenges. And it's in fact our observation that authorship disputes has consistently been one of the areas where people have sought advice from us that was the genesis of this project. But alongside our advisory service, we also regularly publish information guidance and practical tools for a range of audiences, from early career researchers through to senior leaders. We provide training and education, both live and virtually, and we convene collaborative efforts, including cross-sector workshops like those that took place as part of this project. For the sake of time, I won't go into any further detail than that, but I do encourage you to look at our work program for the year if you're interested in finding out more about our work beyond this toolkit. In terms of how we work, I think this project is a really perfect example of our ethos and the two core principles that guide our work. So first, we are shaped and powered by the research community. We believe our role is to listen and to support. And so everything we do, from our strategy through to our services, is built around the research community's needs and priorities. Second of all, we believe research integrity is a shared responsibility. It's not something any one of us can solve alone. It requires collective effort. And that's why your input, your engagement, and your support are absolutely vital to our work. I hope you'll agree the outputs from this project, the reason why the outputs for this project are effective, because they really embody that collaboration and collaboration at its best. So on that note, it's my pleasure to pass over to Dr. Joe Woodhams, our Senior Programs Manager and the lead of this fantastic work. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks so much, Steph, and good morning, everyone. I am delighted you've joined us today, and I'm so pleased to be sharing our newly published Authorship Integrity Toolkit. And thank you again for coming along to learn more about it. So starting off, let's consider authorship and what it means in research. Authorship is one of the most visible and valued aspects of research. It's a core component of good research practice and impacts credibility, job prospects, career advancement, grant funding, and of course, research and innovation. Authorship can strengthen relationships, it can clarify expectations, and it really celebrates the diverse contributions that make research possible. So it's incredibly important to get it right. However, there are times when decisions on authorship can be challenging in practice. So before I dive into the details of the project, I'd like to take a moment to consider what some of you who registered for this launch event are finding challenging when it comes to authorship in research. When you registered for this event, we asked you one question. What aspects of authorship in research do you find most challenging in your work? So last Friday, on the 19th of September, out of the 633 people that registered were registered at that time, 304 had responded to this question. I took the responses and I asked ChatGPT to carry out a thematic analysis. Of course, it's not going to be perfect because it's ChatGPT, but for time, I used it and I asked it to count all mentions within the answers that fit within the themes it identified, the challenges. Here I present the results of the themes, along with the percentage of total mentions, to give you an approximate snapshot of the aspects of authorship and research that are challenging those who answered. The most frequently mentioned themes are authorship disputes and conflict resolution, sadly, where comments mention disputes, disagreements, conflict resolution, cross-organisational disputes, post-publication disputes. After that was the order of authors. It seems to be very important. First, last, corresponding author, sequence, ranking, and order debates were mentioned. The third one down in the graph is criteria for authorship versus acknowledgement, where attendees mentioned debating who qualifies for authorship, acknowledging technical contributions, and the threshold for acknowledgement. After this, there are a host of challenges that rank at a similar level. If we consider power dynamics, respondents mentioned issues such as senior and junior authors, principal investigator dominance, being in precarious positions, senior authors taking credit without contributing, and not feeling able to challenge those more senior. If we look at communication expectations, we had answers mentioning the lack of early discussions leading to disputes, clarifying roles, differing advice causing confusion, and the communication breakdown. So as we can see, authorship in practice does present challenges, and many of you share similar concerns. Each year, the UKRIO receives many inquiries to its advisory service on these very issues. So by reflecting on these inquiries, we listened closely and started exploring how we could better support the research community in this area. We then shared our ideas with UKRI, who commissioned us to bring together stakeholders to foster collaborative thinking and progress on addressing authorship disputes. So we gathered stakeholders from across the research ecosystem to explore what drives good authorship practices, to tackle common challenges, and to try and develop strategies to promote best practices. So our ideas led to the co-creation of the Authorship Integrity Toolkit. These are 3 practical tools to help research stakeholders navigate these authorship challenges and try and foster a healthier research cultures. These tools are a guidance document on authorship and research, which really offers practical advice, a model authorship disputes procedure that gives you a structured and impartial process for resolving authorship disputes. And the third tool is the template authorship strategy agreement. So this is really practical. It will help you try and define credit for your research output, support clear discussions, help manage expectations, and promote fair authorship practices. So as I mentioned, we didn't create these alone. The project was supported by an advisory group that we aptly named the Authorship Advisory Group. The members kindly volunteered their expertise to ensure the project reflected a range of perspectives to try and effectively meet the needs of the research community. The advisory group consisted of representatives from leading organisations within the UK, as you can see by their logos linked on this slide. We were very grateful for their contribution and support during the process. And in addition, we're very grateful to those who attended the stakeholder workshops and to the external independent experts who reviewed an early draft of the authorship guidance document. So the approach we took was to draft the 3 tools with the support of the advisory group and then convene 2 stakeholder workshops, one online and one in person with the same format. We had a total of 83 individuals attend the workshop, And as you can see from the graph on this slide, it shows the stakeholder distribution of the individuals that attended, and there were a good range of those from different roles. The participants of the workshop were sent the draft tools in advance, and we worked through these objectives at the workshop. So we wanted to determine what research collaborators really need to know about authorship, to consider the draft dispute procedure, to ensure the process described was fair and equitable to all parties, and to stress test the draft authorship strategy agreement. You can read more about the workshops in more detail via a report that we published on the UKRIO website. And I think my colleague will share a link in the chat. So at the authorship workshops, we captured as much of the risk discussions as we could by various methods and then fed that back into the tools. The advisory group continued working with us and reviewed the drafts as they were developed into their final versions. We will now briefly talk through each of the outputs that make up the toolkit, the first being the guidance on authorship. So I'm going to talk you through this one and the agreement, and then my colleague Catherine will talk to you about the procedure. So the guidance really aims to offer practical advice to foster a positive culture of best practice in authorship. It clarifies commonly accepted standards, it offers contextual examples, and suggests practical strategies to help contributors to research and innovation from all disciplines navigating potential and actual challenges. While the primary focus is on authorship practices relating to research articles published in scholarly journals, the underlying principles are equally applicable to a broad range of outputs. The guidance iterates the importance of appropriate attribution of authorship of research outputs because, as I've already said, but I'm just going to go over it, authorship comes with responsibility for rigour, trustworthiness, integrity, ethics, and reliability of the reported output. It brings transparency, enabling readers to know who has conducted the research, and it provides credit to those who have substantially contributed to the reported research. So the guidance suggests 4 essential steps to support responsible authorship practice. And this starts with 1, reach a mutual agreement at an early stage of the research on a clear and equitable authorship criteria, considering any relevant publisher or disciplinary guidelines. So it's like agree on the criteria as the first step. Number 2, mutually agree on authorship eligibility based on those agreed criteria and keep a regularly updated record of any changes to authorship that occur during the research process. Then 3, be really transparent about the specific contributions each author has made to the research output. And lastly, formally acknowledge contributions from individuals who do not meet the authorship criteria, thereby ensuring appropriate recognition for all those that contributed. You can use these 4 steps to facilitate informed discussions about contribution to your research. So this is the approach that we're suggesting in the guidance. So the guidance covers many of the challenges that those who have registered for this launch event has raised. For example, interpreting what a substantial contribution is. What does that mean? To consider the order of the authors, dealing with large authorship groups and responding to authorship disputes. We advise that you consult the guidance to support the use of the template authorship strategy agreement and the model authorship disputes procedure where appropriate. So I'm not going to go into huge detail, but you can see for yourselves when you have a look. I'll now move on to the template authorship strategy agreement and tell you about that. So the purpose of this authorship agreement is to define and document how credit for research outputs will be allocated, to facilitate vital discussions, to really manage expectations so everyone understands what is happening, who is going to be an author, who isn't, and to promote fair and equitable authorship practice. So the template agreement is intended to be a flexible guide to support constructive discussions. It's not exhaustive, and not all sections will apply in every context. We encourage contributors to adapt this agreement to fit to the specific nature of their own research and treat it as a living document. So it's a Word document that you can download. Collaborative projects often evolve and new outputs emerge over time. And so does leadership, and contributions will shift as well. So it's a way of trying to record these changes. That's why the agreement can be used to capture key discussions. It should be reviewed regularly and updated to reflect changes in roles, responsibilities, and contributions, especially before starting work on a new output. We advise that you download it, use it as a flexible guide, and adapt it where necessary. So the agreement is divided into two parts, Section A and B. Section A really outlines the sort of foundational work that should be completed at the outset of a research to establish sort of working out that clear strategy for determining authorship. How are you going to approach it? It begins by identifying who will manage and oversee the agreement, sort of the administrative side of things. It then provides space to outline potential research outputs, what are the stakeholder requirements, collaborators' expectations, and key considerations to discuss and help prevent disputes. Then in Section B, this is really designed to be used as the research progresses and the outputs become more clearly defined. It can be replicated as needed for each output, and where necessary, elements of Section A can also be revisited and revised to reflect any changes in circumstances. So as you look through the agreement, you'll notice there are sections to complete. Section A covers, as I said, the sort of administration. For example, who has oversight of the document, where will it live, that kind of thing. Then it goes into details asking about which authorship criteria will be followed. So if you think back to the guidance, that was step 1 of the 4-step process. It then presents various scenarios. For example, what would the contributors do if one became non-responsive and wasn't replying to emails? Or how will co-authors deal with honorary or guest authorship if it arises, as I've shown on this slide? So it gives you space to have that conversation and then sort of type in a record of what was said so that if it does arise, you can reflect back. So in some instances, there is advice given to support the discussion, but you can always refer to the relevant section in the guidance document and discuss that as well to support the process. There is also space to add your own additional considerations that are probably more specific to your research contents that we haven't considered. So if there are other additional things that you want to include, there's space to do that. So at the end of Section A, there's a table to record who is currently expected to contribute to this research. So it's sort of a way to record those expectations right at the beginning. Then in Section B, there's a table that is to make the agreement based on a specific output. You know, when it's much more clearly defined, you're at the point of thinking about titles, where you're going to submit it, that kind of thing. And you can really gather those additional details and agree for that output. So you can see that it's intended to be a live document that can be regularly updated and tracked. We suggest that you use some sort of version control with date stamps so that everyone is clearly informed and consulted. We really hope that you find this useful. Even if you don't use it exactly as it is, you can take and adapt to your own setting, and that it isn't too burdensome, and it really sort of sets that clarity so everybody is on the same page. So please adapt it to your own research and add and remove items as needed. So lastly, we move on to our third output, the authorship dispute procedure. My colleague Catherine Daly, UKRIO's Director of Programmes, is going to talk you through it.
Thank you, Joe, and good morning, everybody. It's great to see so many of you here. Talking about the model authorship dispute procedure, as Joe mentioned earlier, assigning authorship can be challenging, and this can sometimes lead to disputes. And these often arise from poor communication, from unclear expectations, lack of agreed authorship criteria, weak record keeping, and also power imbalances. And that's why it's so important to set clear, shared expectations from the start and keep communication open. As Joe's highlighted, ideally through the use of an authorship strategy agreement. And as we've already heard, disputes can involve disagreements over contributions, the order of authorship, the inclusion or exclusion of contributors to research input, or the proper recognition of a research contributor's intellectual input. So the model dispute procedure aims to set out a structured and impartial way to address these issues and help the research community resolve those fairly, promptly, and in line with principles of research integrity. Next slide, please. So the model authorship dispute procedure involves 3 steps. The focus of step 1 is informal discussion, which aims to achieve resolution by the parties informally discussing the situation and coming to an agreement. This is the most local, and it's always the preferred means of resolution. Step 2 of the procedure involves informal discussions with assistants, which aims to achieve resolution by the parties informally discussing the situation, but with the help of an individual who can act as an impartial mediator to facilitate a mutual agreement. And ideally, steps 1 and 2 should be managed by the researchers, the research contributors themselves. But then step 3 of the procedure entails a formal authorship dispute investigation and adjudication. And the thinking here is that if steps 1 and 2 don't result in a satisfactorily mutually agreed outcome, or these steps aren't deemed suitable given the nature of the dispute, a formal process can then be followed, and an adjudicator will make the decision on behalf of the research contributors to settle the disagreement. And we mentioned earlier the issue of power imbalances that may exist between parties that are in a dispute. And so if there's an individual who feels intimidated, vulnerable, lacks confidence to convey their concerns, or perceives a power imbalance, then it is probably ideal that they move straight to step 2, which entails using an impartial mediator to facilitate a resolution. But if relationships are broken down, or if there's a willingness and lack of willingness between the parties to follow step 2, it's recommended that they move then straight to step 3. But that said, step 3 shouldn't be used frivolously to address personality clashes or conflicts or differences of academic opinion. It should only be used as a way of genuinely resolving authorship disputes. So the procedure guides you through each of the steps with advice. And in step 3, the formal step, a named person is appointed to adjudicate the dispute. And there's a table within that step 3 for that person to consider when conducting their initial review of the materials to help them. But essentially, research contributors should know or be aware that the resources to support and manage formal processes are likely to vary from one organisation to another. It could be that this procedure could be adopted to supplement an organisation's research misconduct procedure and be specifically targeted at resolving authorship disputes, rather than these sorts of disputes being addressed via the full process for investigating allegations of research misconduct. But what matters most is that the steps recommended here are applied in a way that fits the local context and supports the people involved. And the model procedure outlines one viable approach, but research organisations will need to adapt their formal authorship processes in ways that work best for their communities, while still aiming for fairness, clarity, and support. And it perhaps goes without saying that if an authorship dispute arises, it's always better if the matter is resolved at the most local level. So step 1 will always be preferable. But using an approach that's grounded in empathy, emotional intelligence, and collegiality, the aim should always be to consider and protect the well-being of all those involved and to preserve working relationships. So research contributors are encouraged to engage with the procedure in good faith and to resolve issues through open dialogue and mutual understanding. But when disputes do occur, it's recommended that those involved remain focused on the broader purpose, which is of research, which is to advance knowledge for societal and environmental benefit. And of course, the ideal is that keeping this shared goal in mind can encourage dialogue that's more constructive, more collaborative, and more principled in its resolution. So, in conclusion, our overarching goal for the Authorship Integrity Toolkit is to meaningfully support fair and equitable practice by consolidating all the relevant information into a single accessible resource. So we encourage you to use the guidance as a reference document, to try out the template agreement. And if you are facing a disagreement, look at the steps within the procedure to help resolve matters and protect the professional relationships and focus on the purpose of the research. And as a final reflection, authorship disputes don't always occur in isolation. They can reflect deeper cultural and structural changes within the research environment. And so for that reason, it's important to consider disputes in the wider context of research culture and integrity. And bear in mind that addressing these issues requires attention to the core principles of research integrity, which are openness, honesty, and transparency. So thank you. And with that, I'll hand back to Jasper.
Thank you very much, Catherine, as well as Joe, for that presentation. Quickly, before we jump into our Q&A, I wanted to discuss an effort that we are making to keep the toolkit alive, so to speak. As Steph mentioned at the beginning of today's presentation, a key part of the charity's mission is to be both shaped and powered by the research community in the work we do. So with this in mind, a core aim of the Authorship Project as a whole has been to ensure that the Authorship Integrity Toolkit has been co-developed with the research community, meaning it's designed to reflect the community's needs as well as equipped to evolve as those needs change. So to help ensure it remains a living resource, we have set up a feedback form, which we invite anyone who is engaged with the tools or used them in their work to complete. This is a short survey, it takes about 5 to 8 minutes, and an opportunity to share how you're using the tools in your work, how relevant and suitable you found them, and to suggest ways that they could be improved. This will help us update the tools as needed, ensuring they remain fit for purpose and broadly accessible. To note, responses can be submitted anonymously. You'll find a link to complete the form in the chat, as well as on our webpage set up dedicated to the toolkit. If you have feedback further than can be expressed in that form, you can always get in touch with us anytime at info@ukrio.org. So with that being said, I will move us on to our final piece of today's event, the dedicated Q&A session. Thank you to all who have submitted questions already in the Q&A during today's session. I'm just going to give about 60 seconds for anyone else with questions that they would like to put to the project team to submit them into the dedicated Q&A. Just a quick reminder, as I said earlier, if you have questions about or need advice relating to a particular research topic or project, publication problem, or allegation of misconduct, please instead contact us via our advisory service rather than putting it into today's Q&A. With that being said, I'll give 60 seconds for people to submit questions. Okay, Joe, I'm going to get us started with one of the first questions that was submitted earlier in today's event. The question asks, researchers from non-biomedical fields often criticize ICJME guidelines as limited in scope, such that they don't adequately consider authorship context and the realities of other non-biomedical or social sciences fields. Should we start looking at tailoring formalized authorship guidelines in accordance with various fields of study for adoption?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and we have heard an awful lot from the workshops of, a lot of these things have been organised through the biomedical field, through clinical research, that kind of organised that way, and how does that relate to other fields that don't operate in the same way? I think it really very much is about like principles to authorship, and taking that advice forward in a way that, as a community, to adopt what best works for your research. And if all the authors within a particular collaboration agree to that, I think it's agreeing early on, and then moving forward like that. But I think it would be helpful to the community to have discipline-specific criteria if ICJME isn't suitable.
Okay. Our next question is actually a two-parter, so I will read both. First part goes, our research integrity office at a large teaching hospital tried to develop an agreement template to support our busy PIs. We experienced so much pushback that we abandoned the idea in the end. The second part reads, the main arguments against such an agreement was that it will generate conflict by raising expectations in inexperienced researchers that may not be met in the end, giving them a signed document to insist on their demands. Do you see any good arguments to counter this argument? Do you perhaps see this risk as well?
I would tend to disagree, and I think it's very sad that they haven't, I think the idea of our agreement is that you've got those initial conversations in section A. It's not set in stone in that point, because it very much determines what the output is going to be, and that's when you talk more the finer detail in section B. So those expectations aren't heightened. I think often the problem is the mismatch in expectations. So perhaps this agreement template might be more helpful rather than just blanket signing something early on. I think it's having those conversations is really important. Catherine, would you have anything to add to that?
I think the only thing I would say is that, the intention behind the authorship strategy agreement is that it is supposed to be a living document, and so it is supposed to reflect contributions as they evolve. So hopefully that can help to kind of clarify expectations as people's contributions kind of increase or decrease as the project progresses. So that's the intention, but behind it, to help create and then manage those expectations as the project evolves.
Okay, moving on to the next question. The next question reads, are the tools taking PhD students into consideration as their situation is quite unique?
Yes, I would say they do.
So yes, I think that's the idea behind the strategy agreement is to kind of outline all the potential contributors to an output, which could be PhD students, it could be technicians. I think there's a question further down in the chat about the role that technicians can play, and it's designed to kind of interpret research contributors in the kind of the broadest possible sense.
Moving on to the next question. The next question reads, for PhD theses by paper, such as those consisting of 3 papers, sometimes the student is expected to note their % contribution to each paper. Is estimating a % for each co-author's contribution used in other circumstances? Is it a good idea to promote this practice, or is it too prescriptive?
It's very much personal preference, and I believe in the guidance there is one example where they look at percentage. So that's one approach, to sort of weight how much someone has contributed, but it's personal preference, really. Catherine, have you got any more thoughts on that?
I mean, you've outlined that well, Jo. I think it's a possibility, but it may potentially be too prescriptive for a template agreement of this nature. But it's definitely that could be used in particular contexts, such as a PhD student's project.
The next question reads, do you cover specific guidance for those university staff co-authoring with external non-HEI partners like community groups or organizations? As you know, this type of co-authoring counts towards knowledge exchange / KEF, so it's something we are encouraging here at university.
There's not like specific detailed sort of guidance around that, but there are sections that do talk about collaborating with those that aren't in traditional research roles, or are helping co-produce the research from a different perspective. And I think that the agreement does give details about that and how you would acknowledge or have that conversation. There's not much guidance out there around that as a whole from the community. So I would approach it in the same way as you would, do they want to be an author? Have those conversations. That's the point. That's, the point of the agreement early on. Are they interested in authorship? Catherine, anything to add on that?
No, only others to say that again, we've tried to kind of think through all the potential range of research contributors to a particular output, and that could include external contributors, and as Jo said, people who co-contributed in different ways. So I think it's just a case where if using that that strategy agreement to kind of think through all the potential contributors that might conceivably have be listed in some form as a contributor, and then work out what their contribution might be.
The next question reads, thinking of the technician commitment, technical staff are not always recognized in research outputs, and some may not be fully aware that they should be. Is there anything available to help technical staff awareness that they can access these approaches and resources?
I think it's sharing this guidance, sharing this toolkit with them, letting them know that if they fulfill the authorship criteria, then they can be authors. And I think that's the important thing about the messaging around this. It's you don't need to be in a traditional research role to be an author. It very much depends on your contribution to the research.
And I think that's possibly where the credit taxonomy and awareness of that amongst the technician community can help, because that sets out a kind of broader range of contributions to research outputs that hopefully will raise awareness amongst that community of what they're contributing to a particular output.
We have another question that reads, does the guidance and template agreement document align / factor in with the contributor role taxonomy, i.e. credit?
Sorry, can you read that one again?
No worries. Does the guidance and template agreement document align / factor in with the contributor role taxonomy or credit?
Yes, it does discuss this and suggests it as an option. Obviously, a lot of publishers are using that now, and it talks in quite a lot of detail about that and how you might adapt or consider it in a slightly different way if it's not aligned in your field. But it's really a way of sort of describing each person's role within the research. Yeah, there's quite a bit of information in the guidance about that.
Yeah, and it also talks about how credit is potentially evolving as well to sort of fit the needs more of humanities research, because that's again something that has been noted around the appropriateness of credit.
Next question reads, authorship disputes and changes may arise during publication, and it is often quite time-consuming and challenging for publishers. Is there specific guidance for publishers in the toolkits, or do you mainly suggest we refer to the authors' institutions?
I think we mainly say to refer to the institutions for handling these, but the guidance does talk through the role of publishers in the process as well. But yes,
particularly in the dispute procedure, because I don't think necessarily authors always fully understand that the role of the publisher isn't. They don't have all the details. They can't investigate the dispute like an organisation can. So yeah, we do talk about that.
The next question asks, does the authorship dispute procedure consider the maturity of the publication development process, e.g. pre-writing dispute versus paper submitted dispute?
So in the table that's for the responsible person, in step 3, it does make some suggestions about what to consider about the stage of the dispute or the stage of the publication, I believe. We didn't arrange the steps in a way of thinking about where the publication was in the process, but considering the nature of it may be more serious, or if it's already published and then there's a change in authorship, and it's really understanding why that's happened. So there's probably more to the story which may need more investigation. Is that what you would say, Catherine?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think the dispute procedures applies throughout the various stages. The principles are kind of broadly the same, but obviously it becomes a lot more complicated once a publication has been made. So ideally, it should be used for much earlier on in the pre-publication process.
Before we move on to the next question, I just want to note we very much appreciate the volume of questions that have come into the Q&A. Unfortunately, we're going to be having about 5 more minutes dedicated to this section. We're not going to be able to get to everyone who has submitted. What I would suggest is that if you would like, you can submit your question to us via email after the event. We'd be happy to field it there. With that being said, the next question asks, would you have suggestions on encouraging uptake with group leaders? They frequently feedback that they have a high administrative burden, and keeping documents up to date, e.g. probation and development plans for team members, grant reporting. Have any PIs involved in the development of the tool suggested how this could work / be embedded to other / existing processes? That was a long one. I can read it again if you would like.
No, I get it. No, I don't believe we specifically had that question. It wasn't raised at the workshop from what I remember. But I think it's you can allocate it to someone else to have that responsibility. It's meant to be, if it's a collaborative project, someone else could take that responsibility and manage and set it up. So in the beginning of the agreement, Section A really is about who's responsible for managing this, who's going to organise things, where's it going to live, that kind of thing. I think so. You could. It doesn't all have to sit with the PI, I don't think.
No, I mean, it could easily sit with a project manager for a larger kind of collaboration. But I think I'd say it might take some time up front, but if that's a kind of proper, it's a good investment of time if it's going to avoid disputes downstream, because so many of the queries that come through to UKRIO for answering, you can kind of look at them and say, if you'd only kind of communicated or kind of invested some time thinking about this from the outset, this could have been avoided. So that would potentially be the argument to use, in that yes, it might appear burdensome, but if it helps clarify expectations from the start, that can only be a good thing.
So I believe we actually briefly touched on the topic of the next question, but it essentially asks for us to expand on the extent that we address post-publication author disputes within the toolkit.
I think that follows a similar theme to the previous one when it was asking about at what stage the publication is at. I would refer to the procedure looking at the table that's for the responsible person, and it sort of questions, it makes suggestions of questions to ask when they're looking at the dispute. So that's kind of how we addressed it.
Yeah. And I think the procedure acknowledges, doesn't it, that in some cases it may be necessary to refer the case to the full research misconduct process, because it may have got to a point that there are other factors involved as well, or indeed via a different institutional process. So it's that there are kind of different options there to consider.
Okay, I'm going to do one more question before we wrap up this section of today's event. The last question asks, have we thought about creating a suite of authorship case studies dealing with a whole range of authorship issues as part of it? Case studies can be really helpful and provide opportunities for in-depth discussions. They're also very useful in creating awareness of differences in cross-disciplinary settings.
Thanks, Jasper. We do actually have quite a few case studies sitting on our website already for subscribers, and be very happy if anyone wants to get in touch and I can share these with you. There are a couple on the main resources page also, and I believe a couple of those are on authorship, but we would like to develop more case studies to go with this. I think it would be really helpful. Yeah, so we do have some which we can share.
And we're aware that they're always valuable in leading training sessions because they bring some of these issues to light. So yes.
And they've got two versions. One's for the attendees and one's for the person running the session. So it could be helpful for those, even if you're having a group meeting, you could just work through one of the case studies together, that kind of thing. It's really helpful.
Okay, and with that being said, I'm going to draw the Q&A session to a close. Apologies to everyone who has submitted a question that we did not manage to get to. We're thrilled to see that there's so much interest in the toolkit and on this topic. As I said before, if you would like, you may submit your question to us via email and we'd be happy to field it there. So before we wrap up today's session, I just wanted to talk about next steps for this project. Thank you to everyone once again for being part of this launch event for the toolkit and for showing so much engagement in the first week of its publication. After today's session, you'll receive a follow-up email from this event with a short feedback survey for the event. We greatly value your thoughts on the proceedings of today's event. That email will also include a lot of the links that we've circulated in the chat. Later this week, we'll be circulating a video recording of today's session. I know that was a common question in the chat. This session has been recorded and we will be circulating it on our public channels. We encourage you to share both that recording as well as the larger toolkit with colleagues. And feel free to use hashtag UKRIO Authorship Toolkit to share it. And using that hashtag, you'll be able to find our own posts on it as well. Next steps beyond that, we encourage you to stay connected with us, in particular to catch wind of any future developments in this toolkit and in this project, particularly as we take in feedback via the dedicated form that I had introduced earlier. Beyond that, there are a lot of ways you can get involved with our work, which I'll briefly just sort of outline here. You can learn really the entire scope of our activities, projects, and priorities for the upcoming year in our very recently published work program. And you can ensure you stay connected with us by signing up for our monthly newsletter, as well as following us on LinkedIn. All our sort of updates and upcoming opportunities are regularly posted there. You can get directly involved with some of our upcoming work. In particular, you can register for our upcoming events. We will be hosting the next expert webinar, so the next event in this series, just next month on the 15th of October, which will focus on a new guidance just recently published by the University of Nottingham that we were happy to support that focuses on non-genuine participants in online research. And later this month, for our subscribers, we'll be hosting a training focused on mindset awareness and research culture. So you can find links for both of those in the chat. You can also reach out to us via email to explore the benefits of signing your organization up to be a UKRIO subscriber, exploring the possibility of collaborating on future projects, or expressing interest to join our expert community who shape and inform our work. And finally, you can get support by directly utilizing our services, including by exploring our hub of free public resources hosted on our website, utilizing our taught training sessions, or seeking advice through our advisory service. With all that being said, I once again would like to thank you all for joining us and for contributing to this session. It's been really insightful, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.